In 2025, half of the worst-reviewed games on Metacritic made more money than the best ones. This was not an accident. It was the climax of a decade-long shift in the gaming industry. Success no longer comes from making games people love. It comes from making games people can't stop spending money on. This is the story of how the industry learned to monetize mediocrity. 1. The Golden Era, 1990s to 2000s. In 1996, Nintendo released Super Mario 64. You bought it once for $60, and then you played it. There was no online store inside the game, no battle pass, no season of content requiring a monthly subscription, no characters locked behind a paywall, no timer counting down to a limited time offer available for the next 48 hours only. There was a game, and then there was whether the game was good. That constraint, the constraint of having to be good, shaped everything about how the industry operated for the better part of 3 decades. The transaction was simple and brutal in equal measure. A studio spent 2, 3, sometimes 4 years building something. They shipped it. Players bought it or they did not. If it was good, word spread, sales climbed, and the studio got to make another one. If it was bad, the studio absorbed the loss and tried again, or did not survive to try again. There was no second chance embedded in the product itself. No mechanism to extract additional revenue from a player who had already bought the game. Once the box was sold, the transaction was complete, which meant the only lever a studio had to pull was quality. Make something good enough that people tell their friends. Make something good enough that your next game sells on the reputation of your last one. This produced an industry with a specific set of values. Not noble values, necessarily. The gaming industry of the 1990s and the early 2000s had plenty of cynicism, crunch culture, and commercial calculation baked into it. But the commercial calculation pointed in the same direction as the player's interest. A game that was fun to play was also a game that sold. A game that respected the player's time was also a game that generated word of mouth. The incentive structure, however imperfectly, rewarded the right things. Studios became famous for quality. Blizzard, Valve, Naughty Dog, Rockstar, BioWare. These were names that meant something specific, not just that the game would be polished, but that it would be worth your time in a way that went beyond technical execution. Players trusted these names, and that trust was worth something real. It translated directly into pre-orders, launch sales, and the kind of cultural conversation that no marketing budget could manufacture. It was a simple deal. And it worked. The studios that understood their players built franchises that lasted decades, the ones that did not closed. The market, for all its flaws, was doing what markets are supposed to do, punishing bad products and rewarding good ones. Then a device that fit in your pocket changed everything. Section 2. The Trojan Horse, 2007 to 2012. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and introduced the iPhone. He called it a revolutionary mobile phone, an iPod, an internet communicator. He did not mention that it was also about to detonate the economics of an entire entertainment industry. The App Store launched in 2008. Within months, a new category of software appeared that the gaming industry had never encountered before. Games that were free. Not free as a promotional sample, not free as a demo with a paid unlock. Free as a complete, permanent, fully functional product that anyone could download without spending a cent. The first reaction from traditional gaming was dismissal. These were not real games. Angry Birds was not a competition for Halo. Farmville was not threatening Call of Duty. The people making console and PC games looked at mobile and saw something beneath them. Casual, simple, disposable entertainment for people who didn't take gaming seriously. They were looking at the wrong number. The number that mattered was not the quality rating. It was the revenue figure. And the revenue figures coming out of mobile gaming by 2012 were rewriting every assumption the industry had made about how much money a game could generate. Clash of Clans launched in 2012. It was free to download. It was built around a simple loop: build a village, raid other villages, upgrade your defenses, repeat. And it was generating $1.5 million per day within months of launch. Not from game sales. From players voluntarily spending small amounts of money, $1.99 here, $4.99 there, to speed up timers, unlock resources, and stay competitive against other players. The mechanics were not new. Casinos had been using them for decades. But the delivery mechanism was unprecedented. A device that 2 billion people carried in their pocket, connected to a payment system that made spending $2 feel like nothing, running a game specifically engineered to make waiting feel worse than paying. The executives running traditional gaming studios saw these numbers and realized they could make a lot more money. Their question now was, how do we do that? The answer the industry arrived at was not immediate. It took several years of experimentation, failure, and refinement. But the direction was set from the moment those numbers became visible. The goal was no longer to make a game so good that millions of people would pay $60 for it once. The goal was to make a game that millions of people would pay for forever. And to do that, they needed to understand something that game designers had never formally studied before. They needed to understand not just what made games fun, but what made players unable to stop. Section 3. The Science, 2012 to 2016. Around 2012, something changed in the job listings coming out of major gaming studios. The titles were new: behavioral economists, engagement specialists, monetization designers, player psychologists. These were not roles that had existed in the gaming industry a few years earlier. They were roles imported from a different industry entirely, one that had spent decades solving a very similar problem: the casino industry. Casinos had known since the 1970s that the physical design of a machine, the sounds it made, the lights it produced, the rhythm of its feedback loops, had a measurable effect on how long a player stayed and how much they spent. This was not intuition. It was science. Peer-reviewed, carefully documented, deliberately applied science. The way that loss aversion could be weaponized to keep a player chasing a return, they would statistically never see. Gaming companies hired the people who understood this science, and then they built it into their products. The loot box was the result. On the surface, a loot box was simple. You paid a small amount of money, or you earned in-game currency that could be purchased with real money for a randomized reward. Sometimes a common item, sometimes a rare one, occasionally something genuinely valuable. The contents were unknown until the moment of opening, which was, of course, the entire point. Randomness was not a design limitation. It was the product. The uncertainty produced the same neurological response as pulling a slot machine lever, a spike of anticipation followed by a resolution that, regardless of outcome, primed the brain to want to try again. The near miss, getting close to a rare item but not quite, was engineered to feel more motivating than a clean failure. Electronic Arts embedded loot boxes into FIFA's Ultimate Team mode in 2009. By 2016, Ultimate Team was generating over $800 million per year, a single mode inside a single game, producing more revenue than most studios generated from entire catalogs. Activision built them into Call of Duty. Warner Brothers built them into Middle-earth: Shadow of War. Ubisoft built them into nearly everything. The feedback from players was immediate and negative. Forums filled with complaints. Reviews flagged the mechanics as predatory. The companies continued anyway, because the complaints were coming from one group of players, and the money was coming from another. The gaming industry had discovered something that would reshape its entire commercial logic. In any sufficiently large player base, a small percentage of users, typically between 1% and 5%, would spend amounts of money that were disproportionate to any rational assessment of the value they were receiving. These players had a name inside the industry: whales. And the revenue generated by whales was large enough to make the opinions of everyone else commercially irrelevant. A game with 10 million players and a 2% whale rate had 200,000 people willing to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars. Designing the entire monetization system around those 200,000 players at the expense of the experience of the other 9.8 million was not a moral failure. It was, by every metric the industry used to measure success, the correct business decision. The goal had shifted, completely, quietly. Games were no longer being designed to be fun for everyone who played them. They were being designed to be financially irresistible to the small percentage of players who would spend without limit. Fun was no longer the product. 4. The takeover. From 2016 to 2022. On September 26, 2017, Epic Games released Fortnite. It was free. Within 2 years, it had made $9 billion. Not from selling the game, from selling cosmetics inside it. Skins, dances, harvesting tools, visual modifications that changed nothing about how the game played and everything about how a player looked while playing it. Items that were, by any functional measure, worthless, and that players spent billions of dollars acquiring. The mechanism was different from the loot box. Fortnite did not sell randomized rewards. It sold specific items directly at fixed prices, available for limited windows of time. A skin would appear in the shop for 48 hours and then disappear, potentially forever. The scarcity was artificial. Epic could reproduce any digital item at zero cost, but the psychological effect was real. Players who wanted an item and missed the window experienced something similar to loss. And loss aversion, as the behavioral scientists gaming companies had been hiring since 2012 could have told them, is one of the most powerful motivators in human psychology. It also introduced the Battle Pass. For roughly $10 per season, players unlocked a tiered reward track where they completed challenges, earned points, and unlocked cosmetics as they progressed. The model was elegant in ways that loot boxes had not been. It felt fair. Players knew exactly what they were working toward. The rewards were visible up front. There was no randomness, no gambling mechanic, no obvious exploitation. Every major publisher watched Fortnite's numbers and had the same reaction the industry had when it watched Clash of Clans a decade earlier. Activision turned Call of Duty into an annual live service ecosystem. Ubisoft restructured its entire publishing strategy around games as a service. Even Nintendo, historically the most resistant of the major publishers to aggressive monetization, introduced gacha mechanics into mobile titles and Battle Pass systems into its online infrastructure. The consolidation happening beneath the surface was accelerating. Between 2018 and 2022, the gaming industry underwent a wave of acquisitions that concentrated creative control into fewer and fewer hands. Microsoft acquired Bethesda for $7.5 billion in 2021. Then Microsoft spent $68.7 billion acquiring Activision Blizzard in 2023. That was the largest gaming acquisition in history. Sony acquired Bungie. Embracer Group acquired dozens of mid-sized studios across 3 years, accumulating intellectual property at a pace that suggested financial engineering rather than creative vision. Private equity had arrived. Private equity had a specific relationship with the studios it acquired. It was not interested in whether the games were good. It was interested in whether the revenue was recurring, predictable, and scalable. Live service games with large player bases and established monetization systems were attractive assets. Single-player narrative games with high development costs and a one-time revenue event were not. The money flowing into the industry was actively selecting against the type of game that the golden era had been built on. The people making games were increasingly not the people deciding what got made. Creative directors who had spent careers building the kind of experiences that had made gaming culturally significant found themselves in meetings with financial analysts explaining why a game needed a monetization layer to justify its development budget. Studios that had been acquired with promises of creative independence found those promises quietly eroding as quarterly targets arrived, and live service requirements appeared in project briefs that had not mentioned them before the acquisition. The output started to reflect the incentives. Games shipped unfinished, with content that had clearly been removed to sell as post-launch downloadable content. Titles that had been announced as premium single-player experiences quietly added multiplayer modes with cosmetic stores. Review scores declined. Development cycles lengthened. Crunch worsened as studios tried to hit launch windows set by financial calendars rather than creative readiness, and the players started to notice. Section 5, The Collapse, 2022 to present. In 2023, Amazon spent over $200 million developing a Lord of the Rings MMO. It was canceled before it launched. That same year, Ubisoft canceled 4 unannounced games, shut down 3 studios, and watched its stock fall 50% over 12 months. Electronic Arts shut down the studio behind Apex Legends. Sony closed the London studio it had operated for 26 years. Microsoft, 6 months after completing its $68.7 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, the largest gaming acquisition in history, laid off 1,900 employees across its gaming division. The live service model that had been held up as the future of the industry was failing, loudly, publicly, one after another. The players had not disappeared. The gaming market was larger than it had ever been, with over 3 billion people globally playing games across every platform. The players had simply stopped buying what the industry was selling. Review bombing had become a coordinated language. When a beloved franchise added aggressive monetization, removed content, or shipped an unfinished product, players organized across Reddit, Discord, and social media to drive review scores down in numbers large enough that publishers could not ignore them. The backlash was real, the coverage was extensive, and it changed almost nothing. Because the economics of the industry had been restructured around a player who was not participating in the backlash. The whale, the 1% to 5% of players spending hundreds or thousands of dollars per year, was still spending. The mobile gaming market, which had pioneered aggressive monetization and normalized it across a player base of billions, generated $92 billion in revenue in 2023. The top-grossing mobile games, Honor of Kings, PUBG Mobile, and Candy Crush, were not being review-bombed. Their players were not organizing on Reddit. Their players were, in many cases, not even fully aware of how much they were spending. The industry did not need to make games that everyone loved. It needed to make games that a specific kind of player could not stop spending money on. And it had spent a decade getting very, very good at identifying, targeting, and retaining exactly that player. The studios that closed were the ones that had tried to build live service games without understanding this. The studios that were thriving were the ones that had abandoned the pretense entirely, that had built their games from the ground up around the monetization loop, and that treated the content as the vehicle for getting players into that loop rather than the point of the product itself. Artificial intelligence-generated content was reducing the cost of producing the filler, the quests, the cosmetics, the seasonal content that kept live service games populated between major updates. Personalized monetization systems were using player behavior data to dynamically adjust pricing and offers based on individual spending patterns and psychological profiles. The same techniques that had allowed mobile games to identify high-spending players and target them specifically were being refined, scaled, and applied across every major platform. The collapse of the mid-tier studio, the failure of the hastily assembled live service game, the backlash from players who remembered what gaming used to feel like. None of it was changing the direction of the industry, because the direction of the industry was being set by the players who were not complaining. The gaming industry is not broken. That is the part that is hardest to accept. Broken implies malfunction. It implies that something went wrong, that the system failed to do what it was designed to do. But the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is extracting maximum revenue from the largest possible number of players. The golden era of gaming ended not because creativity disappeared. It ended because a more efficient business model arrived, one that did not need creativity to generate revenue, one that needed psychology. And psychology, it turned out, was cheaper to deploy than talent. If you're curious about more corporate breakdowns, subscribe. Click the link on the screen to keep watching.